Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right in today because we have got a seriously fascinating framework to explore. We're pulling from sociologist Raymond Aron's classic work, Peace and War, to look at how the physical world and human populations basically act as the ultimate board and pieces in the high-stakes game of international relations. We usually think of history as just a series of decisions made by powerful leaders. But what if the very ground they stand on and the sheer number of people they lead actually hardwire the rules of the game? Well, let's find out. It brings us to a really provocative question. Does geography actually determine a nation's destiny? I mean, think about it. Does the physical Earth write our history, or is human ingenuity the true author? Keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this, because for centuries, top thinkers and generals have argued over whether our mountains, our oceans, and our climates lock us into an inescapable fate. Section 1. Setting the global stage, the Earth as a territorial board. To really get this, we need to split our view of the world into two totally different perspectives. On one side, we have space as an environment. This is the traditional geographer's view, right? It's concrete. It's about natural resources, rainfall, soil quality, the climate, the whole shebang. But on the flip side, we have space as a theater. This is how a military strategist or a geopolitician looks at that exact same piece of dirt. They strip away all those concrete details and they just see an abstract, stylized game board. They really only care about the features that influence the players. Where can an army pass? Where is a navy going to get blocked? It's geography, but completely simplified for conflict. Section 2. The Geography of Power. Debunking Geographic Determinism. So, historically, some very smart people firmly believed that this geographical game board completely, 100%, dictated how the players behaved. Take the famous philosopher Montesquieu. He literally wrote that the cowardice of people in hot climates has almost always rendered them slaves. I know, it sounds absolutely absurd to us today. The idea that the weather outside dictates your courage, or that living on a flat plain guarantees a specific type of government. It's this incredibly rigid, outdated view known as climate determinism, and it completely ignores human biology and social evolution. And that brings us to the reality check from Raymond Aron. He argues that nature offers a framework of possibilities, but it absolutely does not dictate our fate. Geography is not a straitjacket. Take an island nation like Great Britain or Japan. Nature didn't force them to become global naval empires, and it didn't force them into total isolation either. The water simply presents a challenge and a set of options. The environment influences us for sure, but there's always, a margin for human initiative and choice. But, that hasn't stopped strategists from trying to map out a literal formula for world domination. This brings us to one of the most famous and arguably most influential geopolitical theories ever, Sir Halford Mackinder's 1904 Heartland theory. Mackinder hypothesized that you could divide the globe into strategic zones. His core idea? Whoever controls Eastern Europe controls the Eurasian heartland. Whoever controls the heartland controls the world island, which is essentially Asia, Europe, and Africa combined. And whoever controls the world island controls the world. And this all feeds into what Mackinder called the world island dynamics. In this view, history is basically this epic, constant clash between land powers and sea powers. They represent two entirely different ways of living. Land power is all about possession, holding territory, and pushing these massive, continuous military fronts. Sea power, on the other hand, is about commerce, adventure, and individual initiative. Historically, you had the continental empires of horsemen out on the massive flat plains of the heartland, where the grasslands favored rapid mobility. And pushing against them, you had the maritime empires of sailors. It's a pretty fascinating way to view centuries of human conflict, all shaped by the physical board they were playing on. Section 3. Space as an ideology. Weaponizing geography. Now, things get incredibly dangerous when these abstract geopolitical theories jump off the chalkboard and turn into aggressive national ideologies. Let's look at two historical examples of how space was used to justify state actions. First, we have the German concept of vital space, or Lebensraum. Historically, this was framed as an economic justification. It was the idea that a growing industrial nation inherently needed more agricultural land and raw materials just to avoid starvation. It basically treated the state like a biological organism that had to grow to survive. On the other side, we have the French concept of natural frontiers. Now, this was a strategic and military justification. It argued that a nation's borders should logically extend to natural geographical barriers, like the Rhine River or the Pyrenees Mountains, just to secure a defensible line. Both are clear examples of how nations weaponize geography to legitimize expanding or locking down their borders. To really understand why a concept like vital space gained such terrifying traction, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the 1930s industrial panic. During the Great Depression, the global economy was practically disintegrating. Nations were throwing up these massive protectionist trade barriers everywhere. For industrialized nations that had rapidly growing populations but were confined to relatively small areas, there was a genuine panic-inducing fear of being cut off from raw materials and food. The world felt like it was shrinking. And that led to a terrifying reversion to the old-school mindset of territorial conquest. They truly felt that if they didn't conquer physical space, they would literally not survive.
Section 4. The Illusion of Numbers. Demystifying Demography.
All right, let's pivot from the spaces on the board to the actual game pieces, human populations. Consider this massive number, 4.2 million. The ancient historian Herodotus famously claimed that the Persian army that besieged Greece had 4.2 million men. Now, if you just calculate the logistics of marching an army that size down a road, the front of the army would literally arrive at the battlefield while the rear was still hundreds of miles back in another country. It's completely absurd. Aron calls this the illusion of multitude. Throughout history, numbers have been wildly falsified by chroniclers. Sometimes they did it to excuse a crushing defeat against a supposedly overwhelming horde, and sometimes just to exaggerate the glory of a victory. So, if it wasn't just about having the biggest mob, what was it? The truth is, the real secret to military dominance was never raw multitude. It was the capacity for collective action, discipline, and organization. We kind of have to bust a major historical myth here. The biggest army didn't always win. Think of the Roman legions. They didn't conquer the known world simply by drowning their enemies in a sea of bodies. No, they won through superior organization, the ability to maneuver under fire, and ironclad discipline. The physical number of people, the demographic count, was really only a fraction of their true power.
Section 5. Technology changes the rules, redefining the game.
Now let's jump into the modern era. Check out this data from 1955 by Vermont Gauchy. It's measuring spatial productivity against individual productivity. Look at Western Europe in the middle there. Their spatial productivity is a staggering $58,000 per square mile. That vastly outperforms the massive, sprawling territories of the United States and the Soviet Union at the time. What is this telling us? It means highly dense regions can achieve massive economic output without needing the vast raw space of traditional superpowers. You simply don't need to conquer the endless plains of the heartland to be wealthy anymore. Aron called this phenomenon the growth in intensity, and it's a total game changer. It's the modern realization that nations can thrive, generate incredible wealth, and grow their power through technology, science, and internal productivity. You just don't need to conquer new territories to feed your people or build your economy. Those old, dangerous ideologies of needing more vital space on the map, they're rendered entirely obsolete by the industrial and scientific revolutions. And this is absolutely crucial for us today, because the game board isn't just about how many squares you own anymore. It's about the technological innovation you can generate on the exact square you're standing on. Which leads us to the evolution of power domains over time, as we've moved step by step away from traditional geography. We started on land, right? The era of horsemen, infantry, fighting yard by yard for territorial control. Then we expanded out to the sea, the era of galleys, massive global commerce, and naval supremacy. Then technology rapidly shifted the theater upwards into the air, the era of strategic bombers, where the globe effectively shrank because you could strike anywhere, anytime. And now, moving faster than ever, we are looking at interstellar space, the boundless realm of satellites and rockets. With each rapid step, human technology is literally allowing us to escape the strict, flat boundaries of that old terrestrial game board.
And that leaves us with this final, lingering thought for today's explainer. As we move into an era where power is defined by science, by satellites, and by the vastness above us, are we finally going to outgrow our provincial, territorial disputes down here on the dirt? Or are we simply going to take our old habits, our old conflicts over vital space, and just expand them out into the stars? Can humanity ever truly outgrow the territorial board? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the rules of the game.